so I have on my artificial selection little paper, so I've taped these guys in, but I've taped them in so that I can page through all 3 of them. These are 3 different examples of selective breeding or artificial selection. So I have taped it on the back side of, so then I would just hang on to it and then put them somewhere safe, and then once you get that step in there, you can add it. So yes, if you were not here last week when we added this in, I would just put those somewhere safe. There will be a video up for today. In case you forget, you can go back and look and see where we put those. But if you happen to have that little tab right there, then I have taped those in so that I can page through all 3 of them. Pardon? Yes. Yep. All right, so the information that we're going to add today, I've got it on the left-hand side. So this was the right-hand side page. What I'm going to add is going to be on the left-hand side page. All right, so on the left-hand side page, now I've got this information here, but let me explain. Just hold on for just a second. So we've done natural selection, nature's doing that, adding selection pressures. We did adaptation, that's basically nature as well, so, how the population is responding to selection pressures. Artificial selection, that has to do with us. We are choosing the parents. Resistance, we end up influencing a population based on how we feel whether it's helpful or harmful population. And so resistance, basically we think of antibacterial resistance, but we also influence populations that we think in a good way, and then we end up messing them up as well. So we want more of this population, we end up messing that up too. All right, so now we can take it a step further. If we breed these 2 individuals together and we don't get the results that we want, well, now we can muck about in their DNA. So don't write anything down yet. Let me just explain. So for genetic engineering, and I've got this turned sideways because we're going to add pictures to it, but I'm going to turn it here in just a second. But this is taking the top half of my left-hand side page, and I've got it written on the side here because we're going to add the pictures, and then we have to add information underneath the pictures. So for genetic information, or genetic engineering, this is a technique in which genetic material in a living cell is modified. Genetic engineering, a technique in which the genetic material in a cell is modified. Genetic engineering is a technique in which the genetic material in a living cell is modified. So I've got it on the left-hand side. Oh, I've got it on the left-hand side right here. And then so this top half, and then, whoops, like you write it right there, and then we can put the pictures in. Yep. I would just put it on your right-hand side. Yep, I would put it right there. Genetic engineering, a technique in which genetic material in a living cell is modified. So we have a couple of examples of that. We have a couple of examples here, but there are lots of examples. So now we are mucking about with DNA. We're not just breeding them. We are actually taking the DNA from one organism and putting that DNA into another organism. So before, when we're doing selective breeding, I mean, you have to work with dogs, a dog and a dog. You know, you can't have a dog in a tree or, you know, a cat and a bird. And I mean, that just doesn't work. But now with genetic engineering, it really doesn't matter the species. We don't have to limit ourselves to individuals within the same species. So, for example, we could take the glowing green protein from a jellyfish and we can put it in a mammal. And why would we do that? Well, lots of different reasons. But specifically, one of the reasons why scientists actually take that glowing green protein and put it in cats and rabbits and dogs and mice and stuff like that is to see where it ends up, and that gives scientists an idea about, okay, if I put it in this gene right here, oh, that's the gene for skin color, so now their skin glows. Put it in this gene right here, now it becomes part of their bones and makes their bones glow. But it gives them an idea of what gene is responsible for what characteristic, and so they can kind of track it that way. They're kind of tagging DNA and tracking it that way. So, our first picture. These mice, rats, mice, they're glowing green because of that protein from jellyfish. And so this one, I mean, you can tape it in either way, but we need to see underneath it. I was just feeling kind of wild and crazy and thought I would open it down. You know, why not, right? Doors always open up. Might as well do something different. Yep. But they've taken that protein and they put them in other types of fish. They put them in rabbits. They put them in these little mice/rats. So the glowing green protein from jellyfish, they genetically engineer it. They put that DNA into other critters, and that helps scientists to track genes. So based on what ends up glowing, so muscles glow. Oh, okay, well, that's the gene for skeletal muscle or cardiac muscle. Skin glows. Okay, well, that's epithelial tissue gene or something along those lines. It helps them to track the genes because basically it's tagging them. Glowing green protein from jellyfish helps scientists to track genes. And that's great and all, sure. Lots of good information from that. But I mean, we're like a capitalist society, right? We want to be able to use this and make money from it. So how can we use genetic engineering and make money from it? Well, as it turns out, spider silk has a very, very high tensile strength, like pull strength on it. And so it's really strong comparatively. I mean, it's very small, but it's really strong. But so if we get a whole bunch of that kind of silk together, we can build a rope, a cable, whatever you want, that is very strong relative to its size, length, and stuff like that. Spider silk comes from spiders. So I mean, you know, with any other product that we want, we like build a farm and we put the animals on there and we create the product that we want. Well, spiders are territorial. So you can't just have a spider farm where you have this place and you get all these spiders and you have them make spider silk and you're out there, Farmer Joe, collecting all this spider silk first thing in the morning, whatever. You can't do that because spiders are territorial. And so when they tried to have a spider farm, which is just wrong itself, but when they tried to do that, because spiders are territorial, they fought each other and killed each other. So that ain't going to work. So scientists are like, well, hang on. Goats aren't angry at each other. And goats produce milk, which is a high protein substance, and our spider silk has a lot of protein in it. What if we take this gene that makes spider silk in spiders and put it in a goat? Turns out that they can then use it to create the spider silk in the goat milk. So this one I did do traditional here. So the spider silk gene inserted into the goat genome, and now the goats are producing that valuable spider silk protein in their milk, and then all you have to do is process it to get this silk out. Okay, it works. So the spider silk gene's inserted into the goat genome, and the goats produce that valuable spider silk in their milk, and then we can just process it out and get what we need. Spider silk gene inserted into goat genome. Goats produce valuable silk protein in their milk. So a genome is your entire set of genes, your entire set of DNA for an organism. Spider silk gene inserted into goat genome. Goats produce valuable silk protein in their milk. Spider silk gene inserted into goat genome. Goats produce valuable silk protein in their milk. Then grab yourself a highlighter. Highlight genetic engineering and box in our pictures, our information, our term. But genetic engineering can get to be a little bit messy. I mean, once again, you don't know what you're going to end up with, so it takes a lot of trial and error to get things to work right. It's a pretty expensive process to use restriction enzymes to snip DNA from one individual and put it into another genome. You have to do it before they're adults because, every one of our cells has DNA in it, and so you can't go and change each one of those cells. So you have to do it with, an egg, something before the critter is fully formed, change the DNA then. And of course, there's lots of ethical things with it because people don't necessarily like other people mucking around with DNA. All right, so we still need to solve some problems. So the bottom part is going to be biological pest control. So once again, I'm going to turn this in just a minute, but I've got the term and I've got information about it written off to the side, written sideways. So biological pest control. A form of pest management that uses living organisms to control pests. Biological pest control, a form of pest management that uses living organisms to control pests. So with the chemicals we're spraying, we're creating resistance in these critters. That's not a good thing, because then you have to constantly create new pesticides, new chemicals. And the problem also with a lot of the chemicals that we use is we're using chemicals to disrupt organ systems in the grasshoppers, let's say, in order to kill them. Great, but then if that gets into the environment, that gets into the water, well, what's it doing to us? Well, it's not meant for our organ systems, it's meant for their organ systems, but there's always consequences that you don't know about until after you run through the process. So is there something that's happening? And a lot of the endocrine disruptors, which are these chemicals that we're using on pests, turn out that they do have an effect on us, maybe not directly, but indirectly can still have an effect on us. And so having endocrine disruptors out in the environment, they're harming delicate species, frogs, salamanders, stuff like that, and messing with their reproductive system. And so eventually it's going to make its way around through that food web and through that food chain. So what can we do to get rid of these pests that we want to get rid of, because we want to make money, we want our crops, we don't want them damaged by all these locusts. So what can we do that isn't going to necessarily put additional chemicals out in the environment that can be harmful? So why don't we just use nature against nature? So you put those two in there and have them battle out, and let's see what happens. So the last picture that you have are 4 different examples of how we're going to talk about biological pest control. And so you can just kind of put it you've got your little term right here, and so you can kind of put it smack dab in the middle, and then we'll add information around it. It's up to you. I'm not sure. You might need to get underneath it. It depends on how big you write. There's not a whole lot of details, but I guess that's up to you. I mean, it'd always be safer to put one piece of tape, and then you can always tape it down later if you don't need to get underneath there anyway. Right, and so there's lots of dirt daubers that go after spiders, and they like inject them with venom and paralyze them and pack them into their little dirt dauber nest, which is, and I don't like spiders, but that's horrible. That's a horrible death, because you're just sitting in there packed with everybody else waiting for the larva to hatch out, and then it eats through all that stuff. But I mean, that's a natural pest control. So you put the little dirt daubers where you want them to get the spiders. Or you put spiders where you want them to kill something else. I mean, biological warfare. Okay, all right. Well, let's start with something that's just a little bit nicer than spiders and wasps and nasty stuff. So let's start with ladybugs. Everybody loves ladybugs. Although ladybugs can actually be pretty mean. All right, so some insects eat other insects. So put them together, harvest that, get that going. Ladybugs eat aphids. So release a whole bunch of ladybug larvae out into your crops, into your fields, and let nature do its thing. No, because that would be like a ladybug eating another ladybug, probably. So the aphid would be more like a predator-prey relationship. Carnivore, maybe. Yes? Like, foreign bees, like bees that they don't recognize as part of their little, oh, yeah. Well, are they the bees that pop their heads off? Or are they just, you don't get into that much, huh? Oh, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. I bet. Nowadays, that's high commodity. So yeah, another interesting story, like way back when my son was young, I was like, oh, that'd be really cool to get ladybugs and put in our garden, right? It's going to be so much fun. So there's like a catalog you can get, organic gardening, that you can order ladybugs from. So we ordered ladybugs, and they got there in the spring, and we go out there, and I'm like, oh, here you go, Alex, open it up and let the little ladybugs out. It's going to be so great. And so he's opening them up, and they're all like crawling on our hands. Oh, look. But then what we didn't realize is they've been in this little box for like a week. And so they were very hungry ladybugs. And we'd been outside working, and we were kind of sweaty, so we had salt water, we had sweat on us. So the ladybug started biting us, and Alex was like, oh, and he's like throwing them around, and he's jumping on. I'm like, oh, I traumatized the kid with ladybugs. But we did have a garden free of aphids after that for sure because they were very hungry. Just interesting little fact there. All right, some plants produce chemicals naturally. Chrysanthemums, yes. And so if you've ever been around chrysanthemums, they smell. They have a very heavy odor to them. So that chemical not only is going to, make people get away if they don't like it, it's going to make pests get away as well. Some plants, like chrysanthemums, produce chemicals naturally. Yes, chrysanthemums, mums. And if you've ever been around them this time of the year, they're all over. And so they've got all the little blooms on them. They get really heavy scent to them. And so that's one of the things that's going to deter pests. Marigolds are the same way. And so if you garden in the springtime, they tell you to plant marigolds around your crops because marigolds also, they have a pretty heavy scent to them, and especially if you break the stems and stuff like that. So there are plants that produce caffeine. So caffeine is a central nervous system stimulant, not just for us, but for bugs as well. So you get this little caterpillar that's hungry, and he goes there and he starts eating this leaf, and the leaf has caffeine in it, and he eats too much. His heart's just going to explode. Natural, all natural, biological pest control. Yes, it is. No, the plant said, well, you shouldn't have been eating my leaf. It's a choice. But then they learn and they adapt not to do that. Right, because now they're dead. They're not going to pass off their genes to the next generation. And since they don't pass it off, they don't pass off the desire to eat poisonous leaves. And so everybody else is happy. Black walnut trees, produce a toxin. Pardon? Happy Monday. Okay, yay. All right. So if you have lots of oak trees in your yard, chances are the ground around them is kind of bare. Black walnuts, they also exude a toxin, and that kills out the other grass and plants that are around there, so they don't have to compete. They don't compete for sunlight. They don't compete for water because whatever falls there, those trees get. So they kind of have that. We talked about that. Codling moths. So we have used, I'll get to that in a minute. We've modified viruses and take a virus. And so a virus that doesn't affect us but affects codling moths, well, we want to get rid of the moths, so we expose them to a virus, and we make their whole population sick. So that whole population gets sick and dies out, and so we get rid of the moths. Problem is, it's kind of like mosquitoes. The moths end up being part of a food chain, and we take away that from the food chain, and we're affecting that whole food chain. But we do biological warfare against pests with viruses. So we can use viruses to attack pests as a pesticide. We can use viruses that attack pests as a pesticide. And then finally, we can use microscopic organisms that aren't viruses. We can use other things like nematodes. They're like, I mentioned when we talked about the different kingdoms that even within the animal kingdom, most animals aren't the dog, cat, fish, bird that we would normally think of. Like most animals in the animal kingdom are worms, one kind of worm or another. And so some worms are microscopic, and some of them we can use to our own benefit. And one of the other things that I did when I was into gardening, organic gardening, is you can order these little nematodes for pest control, and you just spray it. They're microscopic, so it wasn't as much fun as the ladybugs. But you just spray it on where your garden's at, and those little nematodes would destroy the grub larva, the big, nasty grub larva that gets in the soil, and it would destroy them so that it wouldn't destroy the crops. So we can use that kind of relationship as pest control as well. So microscopic control. Nematodes naturally kill grub larvae. So you put the nematodes in the environment and they're going to do their thing. Whereas normally the soil might be too dry or the environment might be not suitable for it. So you water it down real well and then you put the grubs. Then they burrow into the little grub larvae. Microscopic control. Nematodes naturally kill grub larvae.